Now, are people writing letters to ministers and to their local MPs objecting to the proposals? Are people pointing out the risks of changing the system in 2012? I mean, 2012 is Olympic year. It's not actually a very good year to be changing the policing system. When I was operating on behalf of my own organisation to try and stave off some government changes that were coming to my organisation, one of the things I did was to write to the Home Secretary pointing out the risks of what was being proposed, and they were very substantial. I think the same is true with policing. I think there are a lot of risks to changing the system in 2012, 2013, and they need to be spelt out. I'm also very concerned, and I know a lot of people are, about the threat of corruption in the new system. I mean, if you talk to people in America, they will tell you a lot about the fact that they're not happy about the system in America because there's a lot of corruption in some parts of America, particularly around arrangements of directly elected and appointed officials in policing. And again, I think people are entitled to assurances. How is this going to be dealt with in this country? Is there a threat of corruption? You know, would this be a problem? How would we deal with it? And I'm quite sure that this is the arena in which the APA is operating. I've just got one question, though. I'd like to know, I don't know what the answer is, how do you think the APA is seen by government ministers? Is the APA seen as a resolute opponent? Is it seen as strong? Is it seen as devious? Or is it seen as, you know, somebody who's going to be really fighting hard? I think it's quite important how your opponents see you, actually, because at the end of the day, there may well be compromises to be struck. And a lot depends on how people who are fighting on opposite sides perceive each other. So I think there are important issues there as well. Now, if we move on to national partner bodies, there are clearly other bodies who I would have thought should be fighting with the APA. The LGA, which last time round was a very effective ally. I'm less certain about what the relations are with ACPO and the Superintendents Association and the Police Federation. Sometimes, of course, they're not sure themselves. Anyway, but there are also the national organisations of those who work with the police, magistrates, the CBI, big national security companies, chief executives, national bodies, and so forth. So I'm assuming that all these links have been made and that as the bill progresses, these links will become more and more important. The one thing that strikes me is I've seen very little written in favour of these new changes. I've seen a lot of people writing articles against the changes, but the only articles I've actually seen in favour of either come from the policing minister himself or from, I think, one or two people in London. I really can't think that I've seen anything very strongly in favour of the changes. And again, I think there's a lot to play for. People keep telling me up and down the country that meetings have been held and local people have been giving their views very strongly against the changes. I hope all that's been documented, but I do think it's important that the APA keeps a record of meetings up and down the country and is able to actually cite occasions when local people have given their views and have shown their opposition. I've left till last, and I shall speak very quickly about this because Anne was talking about it, and that is the danger of all this and what's going on to the existence of the APA. I think it would be a disaster if the APA folded up halfway through the passage of the bill because it would vindicate everything that the government is saying about the weakness of police authorities. I know there are funding issues, I know there are problems, but it seems to me a twin-track approach is the right one in the sense that one has to be optimistic and assume the APA and police authorities have a future, but realistic at the same time and have plans for a worst-case scenario if the APA has to wind up. So I think flexibility is the key here. You've got to be planning for maybe 1, 2, 3 different outcomes. And I agree with Anne absolutely that the hardest hit people are going to be our loyal and hard-working staff, both locally and nationally, many of whom have worked for years for police authorities of the APA. And whatever we do, it seems to me that we have to keep their welfare in our minds as well as the future of policing. So I think there is an issue about the APA, and I endorse everything that Anne was saying earlier. And in conclusion, I'm not a betting person, and if I was, I really wouldn't know how to assess the odds at the moment. On the one hand, the bill will have a majority in the Commons and maybe also in the Lords by the time it gets there because new peers are coming into the Lords shortly. On the other hand, I can tell you that in the last week in the Lords, the government's been defeated twice on 2 separate measures, so there is a possibility that that can happen. So objectively, on the one hand, therefore, the optimism and assurance of the Prime Minister and the Home Office that this measure can't be stopped seems on the surface justified. And yet we know it's got a lot of opponents, many of them in the Conservative and Liberal parties, local councillors, business people, people who don't want politics to be introduced back into policing. It's difficult to know how strong their voices will be and how much political capital the government will feel it worth expending to buy off opposition and to ram this measure through. And part of my problem in trying to work out what the future is that I really don't understand why the policing minister and the Prime Minister are so set on this change. I really can't, and that's a problem for me, because I don't understand why they're so set on bringing this system in. It's difficult, therefore, to know how far they will go to actually enforce it across the country. So I think, therefore, that there's everything to play for. I really do believe that. There's everything to play for, but if the measure does go through both houses, police authorities will have a duty to their local communities to ensure that the governance of policing remains strong during any changeover, because the consequences of not doing so would be catastrophic. So that means we have a duty to ensure that work at the national level is able to continue to manage the consequences of the bill, whatever we think of it. So in conclusion then, we've got strong principles on our side, we've got strong support on our side. I don't think we should waver in making it clear what we stand for. We may not win in the end, but surely we must fight hard, and we must fight in a principled way right through to the last round, because I think we owe it. We owe it to the people that are represented. We owe it to the police service. We owe it to all the hard work of the last 13, 15 years of police authorities, to our staff, and I think people owe it to themselves. I genuinely believe, as Anne was saying earlier, that police authorities have made the policing system work effectively over the past few years. Police authorities have worked with the police to drive down crime to unprecedentedly low levels, and that's something to be proud of. HMI, in their recent assessments of police authorities, confirmed their competence and confirmed their ability to do the job. So there is a lot at stake here. And I think that local people want you to campaign as strongly on their behalf as possible, to ensure that policing remains accountable to them through the channels they understand, and that means local councillors, and it means the local systems that they understand. And I really do believe, therefore, that everybody in this room has a mission, if you like, to fight for the system that has worked so effectively. And if at the end of the day things have to change, they have to change. But I think at this point, my message would be, I still think there's everything to fight for. Thank you.
I am conscious of the time, everybody, but I'm actually going to steal 5 minutes of coffee. Thank you, Ruth, very much indeed. A real rallying cry for us today, and to be perfectly honest, we needed it. I remember somebody saying not long ago, we've lost this battle, and I said, you can't lose a battle you haven't fought.